The story opens at the courthouse altar, where Clara Jackson stands frozen in terror as she prepares to marry a man who looks like he belongs in a medical museum, an ancient, hunched figure wrapped in bandages, his gnarled hands trembling on a silver-topped cane, his face a patchwork of gauze and dark glasses hiding God knows what underneath. The judge drones through the vows while every cell in Clara's body screams at her to bolt for the exit. But the memory of loan sharks surrounding her teenage sister forces her to choke out the words, "I do." The narrator then sets the stage by promising an impossible twist, asking how a dedicated schoolteacher with a bright future ended up signing her life away to a man who looked like death itself, and how this nightmare would transform into something she never could have imagined. Clara was grading papers at the kitchen table when the front door crashed open. Her father stumbled in, reeking of whiskey and desperation, followed by two men in expensive suits who looked like they collected more than just debts. The shorter one, all dead eyes and gold rings, pulled out a chair and sat without being invited. "Your daddy owes us $150,000, Miss Jackson." His voice was silk over razors. "We've been very patient. But patience has an expiration date." Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her 16-year-old face pale with fear. Clara moved instinctively between her sister and the men. "I don't have that kind of money," Clara said, hating how her voice shook. "We know." The man smiled without warmth. "That's why your father here has been creative. Found himself a benefactor. Isn't that right, Marty?" Martin Jackson wouldn't meet her eyes. "There's this man. Bernard Hale. Owns half the county. He needs a wife. And he's willing to pay." The room tilted. "You're selling me?" "It's not like that, Clara." "1 week," the gold-ringed man interrupted, standing. "Mr. Hale pays the debt, or we take payment another way." His eyes flickered to Emma. "And little sisters make excellent collateral." They left Clara standing in the wreckage of her life, Emma crying behind her, and her father finally showing something like shame. She had 7 days to decide if she was brave enough to save her sister by destroying herself. Mrs. Chen arrived exactly on time, a silver-haired woman in a charcoal suit who radiated quiet authority. She spread the contract across Clara's scarred kitchen table with the precision of a surgeon. "Mr. Hale understands this is unconventional," she began. "But he values directness. He requires a wife. You require financial security. The terms are generous." Clara's hands shook as she read. $300,000. Half to her father's creditors. Half held in trust for Emma's education, untouchable by Martin Jackson. "Why me?" Clara whispered. "Mr. Hale prefers someone who won't ask questions about his appearance or circumstances. Someone motivated by necessity rather than romance. I want to meet him first." Mrs. Chen's expression flickered, surprise, maybe respect. "Of course." The meeting happened at midnight in the abandoned library on Main Street. Clara waited in the dark children's section, her phone flashlight casting grotesque shadows, until she heard the tap of a cane. Bernard Hale emerged from the darkness like something from a nightmare. Hunched, trembling, his face hidden behind bandages and dark glasses that reflected her terrified expression. Liver-spotted hands gripped his cane. When he spoke, his voice was a raspy whisper that barely carried across the space between them. "You're frightened. Wouldn't you be?" A sound that might have been a laugh. "Every day of my life, Miss Jackson." He stayed in the shadows. Asked about her teaching. About Emma. About her dreams, and when she mentioned wanting to open a community library, something in his posture shifted. "Sign the contract," he rasped. "Save your sister. In return, I ask only that you try not to look at me with horror every day. Can you manage that?" Clara thought of Emma. Of the men with dead eyes. "Yes. Then we have an arrangement." The Hale mansion crouched at the end of Blackwood Road like a Gothic fever dream, 3 stories of Victorian excess, its windows dark even at midday, its gardens overgrown with roses that had gone feral. Clara's entire apartment could have fit in the foyer. Mrs. Chen handed her a key. Mr. Hale keeps to the east wing. Your quarters are in the west. He prefers limited, direct contact. You'll find communication easier through notes. The house was a contradiction. Peeling wallpaper and dusty chandeliers, but also sleek tablets mounted on walls, a state-of-the-art kitchen that looked like it belonged in a tech billionaire's penthouse, and a library that made Clara's heart stop, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with first editions, leather-bound classics, and books she'd only dreamed of touching. Her bedroom was larger than her old apartment, with windows overlooking the wild gardens. On the nightstand sat a handwritten note in surprisingly elegant script, "Welcome home. Please make yourself comfortable. The library is yours to enjoy. B." She found him that evening in what Mrs. Chen called the conservatory, a glass-roofed room filled with plants and shadows. Bernard sat in a wingback chair position so the dying light wouldn't reach his face. His bandaged hands held a book. "Thank you for the library access," Clara said to the darkness. "Books should be read, not imprisoned on shelves." That raspy whisper again. "What did you think of the Austen first edition?" "I was afraid to touch it." Fear and reverence aren't the same thing. Touch it. Love it. That's what it's there for. She stood awkwardly, unsure how to exist in this strange new world. "Mrs. Chen said you prefer notes." "I prefer whatever makes you comfortable, Clara. If you can stand to share space with me, I'd appreciate the company." Something in that admission, lonely, vulnerable, made her stay. The gift started small. A first edition of Jane Eyre appeared on her breakfast tray with a note, "You mentioned loving this. It should live with someone who understands it." Then came approval for every single item on her classroom supply request, $3,000 worth of books, art supplies, and learning materials she'd never dreamed of affording. But the laptop was what broke something open in her chest. Top of the line, loaded with library management software, digital cataloging systems, and a note that simply read, "Every dream requires tools." She found Bernard in the conservatory that evening, his usual shadows and bandages, but something about his posture seemed less hunched, more expectant. "The laptop is too much," she said. "Is it functioning?" "Yes, but..." "Then it's exactly right." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Join me for dinner." It became their routine. Dinner in the conservatory as twilight painted the glass ceiling purple, Bernard always positioned in shadow, Clara gradually learning to see past the monster her eyes insisted he was. His conversation was brilliant, he debated literature with the passion of a scholar, discussed politics with nuance, made her laugh with dry observations about small-town hypocrisy. "How old are you, really?" she asked one evening, emboldened by wine. A pause. "Old enough to know better than to trap someone in a marriage of convenience." "You didn't trap me. My father did. And I took advantage. We can dress it in pretty contracts, Clara, but I bought you. The least I can do is make the cage comfortable." "It doesn't feel like a cage," she admitted, surprising herself with the truth. "Give it time," he said, but his raspy voice carried something that sounded almost like hope. Clara noticed it during their evening discussions. Bernard's arthritic hand would occasionally move with perfect precision, especially when he forgot himself while sketching on the notepad he kept nearby. The trembling would cease, and his fingers would flow across the page with an artist's grace before he'd catch himself and resume the shaking. Then there was his voice. The rasp would slip sometimes, revealing a younger timbre underneath, smooth and rich before he'd catch it and force it back to that gravelly whisper. She started paying attention. Really looking. The medication cabinet in the hallway bathroom she'd accidentally opened, bottles prescribed to Bernard J. Hale Jr., age 32. The photograph tucked in a library book showing a handsome, dark-haired man in a sharp suit standing in front of a tech company logo. The newspaper clippings she found while reorganizing shelves, "Tech mogul disappears after $40 million embezzlement scandal." One evening, she watched Bernard reach for a book on a high shelf, his body unfolding to its full height, easily 6 feet, before he seemed to remember himself and collapsed back into his hunched posture. "Bernard," she asked carefully. "Can I ask you something?" The bandaged head turned toward her, dark glasses reflecting nothing. "Of course. Why do you hide?" Silence stretched between them. Finally, "Because the world is full of people who want things from you. And if they can't see you clearly, they can't want the wrong things. What if someone wanted to see the real you?" "No one does, Clara. Trust me on that." But she was beginning to suspect that whoever Bernard Hale really was, he was nothing like the monster he pretended to be. Emma arrived with her marine biology textbooks and an expression that warned Clara she was prepared to be horrified. Instead, within an hour, she was sitting in the conservatory peppering Bernard with questions about ocean acidification while he pulled up research databases on his tablet with those supposedly arthritic fingers. "The coral bleaching is accelerating faster than models predicted," Bernard said, his raspy voice somehow conveying genuine passion. "But there are researchers in Australia working on heat-resistant coral strains. Your generation might be the one that saves the reefs, Emma." Clara watched her sister's face light up. "You really think so?" "I think young people who care enough to study marine biology at 16 are exactly the kind of people who change the world." After Emma left, clutching a check for her first semester of college that Bernard had written as an investment in the future, she pulled Clara aside on the front steps. "Clara." Emma's voice was fierce. "I don't care what he looks like. I don't care about the bandages or the whatever. That man in there sees you the way you deserve to be seen." "What do you mean?" "He looks at you like you're the miracle, not him. Like you're the rare thing in the room." Emma hugged her hard. "Don't you dare let this go just because it started weird." Clara stood on the steps long after Emma's car disappeared, staring up at the mansion's dark windows, realizing with a jolt of terror that somewhere between the gifts and the conversations and the shared dinners in shadow, she'd done the impossible. She'd fallen for her husband. The husband who was lying to her about everything. The argument started over money. Her father had called demanding another $50,000, claiming the loan sharks were back. Clara was furious that Martin thought he could bleed them dry, but Bernard had gone cold and distant, retreating behind his bandages. "You don't understand," she snapped, following him into his private study for the first time. "He'll never stop. We need to cut him off. I'll handle it. Like you handle everything. By hiding and throwing money at problems." Bernard spun to face her, and she saw his hands clench, young, strong hands with no tremor at all. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Then tell me." She grabbed his arm without thinking. "Stop hiding from me and just." Her fingers caught the edge of something. A seam. She pulled instinctively, and a piece of latex came away in her hand, a prosthetic wrinkle, complete with liver spots, trailing adhesive. They both froze. "Clara," Bernard's voice was different. Younger. Desperate. In her shock, she knocked the dark glasses from his face, and they clattered to the floor. The man standing before her was maybe 35, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that were wide with panic. Handsome in a way that made her earlier horror seem absurd. His bandages were clearly theatrical makeup, and as she stared, she could see where the prosthetics had been carefully applied to create the illusion of age and disfigurement. "You're not old," she whispered. "Clara, let me explain. You're not even sick." This whole time, her voice broke. "Who are you?" Bernard, or whoever he really was, reached toward her, then dropped his hand. "My name is Bernard Hale. That part is true. But everything else." He closed his eyes. Everything else was a lie. Bernard sat heavily in his desk chair, all pretense abandoned, and for the first time Clara saw real fear in his expression. Her name was Vanessa. "We built the company together, Tech Solutions for Library Systems, actually. Ironic, isn't it?" He pulled out a tablet, showed her photographs. A beautiful woman with a calculated smile. News articles about a whirlwind engagement. Then the headlines: CFO vanishes with $40 million, and tech mogul's fiancé orchestrates massive embezzlement. She played a long game. 3 years of building trust, access, love. His voice was bitter now, fully his own, younger, educated, hurt. The proposal was her exit cue. She disappeared the next day with everything. The money, the intellectual property, the trust I'd been stupid enough to give her. Clara sank into a chair, her mind reeling. So you created this? I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't meet someone and wonder if they saw dollar signs. Couldn't trust that anyone's interest was real. He gestured at his face, the scattered prosthetics. So I became someone no one could possibly want for money. Someone repulsive. Someone who would only attract the truly desperate. Like me. The words tasted like ash. Yes. No. God, Clara, it's complicated. He ran his real hands through his dark hair. Your father's situation came to my lawyer's attention. I saw an opportunity, someone who couldn't refuse, wouldn't ask questions, and might be willing to just exist beside me without wanting anything more. But then you gave me gifts. The library. The laptop. You made me, her voice cracked. You made me care about someone who doesn't exist. He exists. This, Bernard touched his chest, this is me. The conversations, the interests, the things we talked about. That's all real. The only lie was the wrapping. The wrapping was the entire deal, Bernard. You manipulated me into falling for. She stopped, horrified that she'd admitted it. His expression transformed. You fell for me. For who I thought you were. Not for whoever this is. It's the same person, Clara. I swear to you. A sound outside made them both freeze. Car doors slamming. Multiple voices. Bernard crossed to the window and went pale. Marcus. And your father. Clara, how many people did Martin tell about our arrangement? She joined him at the window and felt her blood turn to ice. Her father was there, along with a man who looked like a corporate shark, a woman with a camera, and someone taking notes. I didn't tell anyone, she said. But my father would sell anyone out for the right price. Bernard's jaw clenched. Marcus has been waiting for this. Evidence that I'm mentally incompetent, manipulated into marriage. If he can prove it, he takes control of the company. Then we tell them the truth. Show them you're not incompetent. And admit I perpetrated fraud. That our marriage is a sham. He looked at her desperately. Clara, I know I have no right to ask this, but we figure this out together, she said, surprising herself. I'm furious with you. You lied to me about everything. But those men out there. She glanced at the window. They're worse. So let's deal with them first. Then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about honesty. A smile flickered across his real face, young, hopeful, and utterly human. Deal. Marcus Hale had their father's predatory smile and none of Bernard's complexity. He swept into the study like he owned it, the journalist and lawyer flanking him, Martin Jackson trailing behind with the guilty expression of a man who knew he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Well, well. Marcus's eyes gleamed. Brother. And the little wife. Perfect timing. Bernard had managed to reapply some of the prosthetics, but Clara noticed Marcus's smirk. He knew something was wrong. You have no business here, Marcus. On the contrary. I have documentation that you, in a state of diminished mental capacity, were manipulated into a fraudulent marriage by this woman and her con artist father. He nodded to the journalist. Ms. Pierce here is going to document everything for the public record. And Mr. Whitmore, the lawyer stepped forward, has papers declaring you mentally unfit to run Hale Technologies. That's absurd, Clara snapped. Your brother is perfectly competent. Is he? Then perhaps he can explain why he's wearing theatrical makeup. Why his elderly invalid routine is falling apart. Marcus moved closer. Or shall we discuss the security footage I have of him moving without any assistance? Speaking in a voice 30 years younger than he claims. Bernard's jaw tightened, but Clara saw the calculation in his eyes. He was planning something. You're right, Bernard said quietly. I've been lying. Bernard, Clara started, but he shot her a look. I've been lying about being incapacitated. About needing protection. About a lot of things. He straightened to his full height, pulling off the remaining prosthetics. But the biggest lie? It wasn't mine. He tapped his tablet, and the large screen on the wall flickered to life. Spreadsheets. Bank transfers. Email chains. For the past 8 months, Marcus, you've been embezzling from the company. Small amounts, cleverly hidden. But I've been tracking every cent. Marcus's face went sheet white. You can't prove. I can. I have. And the SEC has had this information for 3 weeks. Bernard's smile was razor-sharp. You want to talk about fraud? Let's talk about the $2.3 million you've stolen. Let's discuss how you hired these people, he gestured to the journalist and lawyer, using company funds for a personal vendetta. He turned to Martin Jackson. And you? You think I didn't know you were planning to extort more money? That I didn't have you followed after Clara told me about your threats? Another screen appeared, photos of Martin meeting with Marcus, documents exchanging hands. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Extortion. Should I continue? Clara stared at her husband, her real husband, whoever he was, and felt something shift inside her. He'd protected her. Even while lying, even while playing games, he'd been protecting her. The police are already on their way, Bernard continued. Mrs. Chen made the call 10 minutes ago. So you have 2 choices, Marcus. Leave now and pray I don't pursue criminal charges in addition to civil litigation. Or wait for the handcuffs. Marcus looked between Bernard and the door, calculation warring with rage. Finally, he spun toward the journalist. This interview is over. They fled like rats from a sinking ship, Martin included, though he shot Clara one last look that was part apology, part resentment. The room fell silent except for their breathing. How long have you known? Clara asked. About Marcus? Months. About your father's plan to squeeze more money? Since your first phone call with him. Bernard set down the tablet, suddenly looking exhausted. I'm sorry, Clara. For all of it. The deception, the manipulation, Don't. She held up a hand. Don't apologize for protecting me from my own father. But everything else. The disguise, the lies about who you are. That we need to talk about. I know. And this marriage, it's not real. Not legally, probably, given the fraud. No, he agreed quietly. We should annul it. Yes. She took a breath. And then, if you're interested, maybe we could try again. Honestly this time. Bernard's expression transformed, hope, disbelief, something that looked like joy. You'd want that? After everything? I fell in love with the person you are, Bernard. Not the makeup or the money or the mansion. The person who cares about coral reefs and believes in libraries and sees people instead of using them. She moved closer. But I need to meet that person. The real one. No more disguises. No more disguises, he promised. Just me. If that's enough. Let's find out. Outside, police sirens wailed in the distance. But inside the study, Bernard Hale took Clara Jackson's hand, his real hand, young and strong and trembling slightly with emotion, and smiled his real smile. It was more than enough. It was everything. 6 months later, the community library opened in the restored Victorian on Main Street, the building where Clara and Bernard had first met in the shadows. Now it blazed with light, filled with books and computers and people who'd never had a place like this before. The wedding was held in the library's reading room, surrounded by shelves Clara had organized herself, using the system Bernard had helped her design. Emma stood as maid of honor, radiant in blue, while Mrs. Chen served as Bernard's best woman with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything. Clara wore a dress she'd chosen herself, simple ivory lace, no borrowed desperation. Bernard wore a suit that fit him perfectly, his real face visible to everyone, the students from Clara's school, the town librarians, the small crowd of people who'd come to witness what the local paper called the strangest love story in county history. "I do," Clara said, meeting Bernard's eyes, dark and clear and finally honest. "I do," Bernard echoed, and this time when he kissed his wife, there were no bandages, no shadows, no lies between them. Just two people who'd found each other in the dark and decided to step into the light together. Martin Jackson wasn't invited. He was serving 18 months for extortion and conspiracy, time that Clara hoped would give him the chance to find the kind of redemption he'd never sought before. Marcus Hale had fled to the Cayman Islands ahead of federal charges, leaving Bernard to rebuild the company he'd nearly destroyed. As the reception spilled out into the library's garden, overgrown roses now trained into careful beauty, Emma pulled Clara aside. "So," her sister said with a grin. "Worth marrying the monster." Clara looked across the garden where Bernard was explaining library database architecture to a fascinated teenager, his hands moving with that precise grace she'd first noticed months ago, his real voice carrying warmth and passion and absolutely no pretense. "Turns out," Clara said, "he was never the monster. Just a man afraid of being seen. And now we both get to be exactly who we are." Emma hugged her. "That's what I call a happy ending." Clara smiled, watching her husband catch her eye across the garden and grin, young, real, and completely hers. "No," she said softly. "It's what I call a beginning." And in the library they'd built together, surrounded by books and truth and people they loved, Clara and Bernard began the next chapter of their story. This time, they wrote it together.